Hello, this is John Rhapsodes, bringing you a Christmas story today from 1892 by Francois Coppee. Coppee was a French novelist and poet who lived from 1842 to 1908. Today's story is called The Louis d'Or, which was published in English in an 1892 compilation of stories titled Christmas Stories from French and Spanish Writers by Antoinette Ogden. The story's title, The Louis d'Or, references an old French gold coin that bore the likeness of King Louis. Hear the words of old. When Lucien de Hem saw his last bill for 100 francs clawed by the banker's rake, when he rose from the roulette table where he had just lost the debris of his little fortune scraped together for this supreme battle, he experienced something like vertigo and thought that he should fall. His brain was muddled. His legs were limp and trembling. He threw himself upon the leather lounge that circled the gambling table. For a few moments, Lucien mechanically followed the clandestine proceedings of that hell in which he had sullied the best years of his youth, recognized the worn profiles of the gamblers under the merciless glare of the three great shadeless lamps, listened to the clicking and the sliding of the gold over the felt, realized that he was bankrupt, lost, remembered that in the top drawer of his dressing table lay a pair of pistols, the very pistols of which General de Hem, his father, had made noble use at the attack of Zacha. Then, overcome by exhaustion, Lucien sank into a heavy sleep. When Lucien awoke, his mouth was clammy, and his tongue stuck to his palate. He realized by a hasty glance at the clock that he had scarcely slept a half hour, and he felt the imperious necessity of going out to get a breath of the fresh night air. The hands on the dial pointed exactly to 11:15. As he rose and stretched his arms, it occurred to Lucien that it was Christmas Eve. And by one of those ironic freaks of the memory, he felt as though he were once more a child, ready to stand his little boot on the hearth before going to bed to act as a stocking for gifts from Santa. Just then, old Dronsky, one of the pillars of the gambling trade, and wrapped in a greasy-worn Polish military cloak adorned with ornamental fringes, came up to Lucien, muttering something behind his dirty, grayish beard. "Lend me 5 francs, will you, monsieur? I haven't stirred from this place for 2 days, and for 2 whole days 17 hasn't come out once. You may laugh at me all you like, but I'll bet you my fist that when the clock strikes 12, 17 will be the winning number." Lucien de Hem shrugged his shoulders, and fumbling through his pockets, he found that he did not even have enough money to comply with that feature of gambling etiquette known among the frequenters of that particular casino as the Pole's 100 cents. Lucien passed into the antechamber, put on his hat and cloak, and disappeared from the narrow stairway with the agility of people who have a fever. During the 4 hours which Lucien had spent in the den, it had snowed heavily, and the street, one of those narrow wedges between 2 rows of high buildings in the very heart of Paris, was intensely white. Above, in the calm blue black of the sky, gold stars glittered. The exhausted gambler shivered under his furs and hurried along with a blank despair in his heart, thinking of the pistols that awaited him in the top drawer of his dressing table. He had not gone 100 feet when he stopped suddenly before a heart-rending spectacle. On a stone bench, near the monumental doorway of a wealthy residence, sat a little girl 6 or 7 years old, barely covered by a ragged black gown. She had fallen asleep there in spite of the bitter cold, her body bent forward in a pitiful posture of resigned exhaustion. Her poor little head and her dainty shoulder had molded themselves into the angle of the freezing wall. One of her worn slippers had fallen from her dangling foot and lay in the snow before her. Lucien de Hem mechanically thrust his hand into his vest pocket, but he remembered that he had not even been able to tip the club waiter. He went up to the child, however, impelled by an instinct of pity. He meant, no doubt, to pick her up and take her home with him, to give her shelter for the night, when suddenly he saw something glitter in the little slipper at his feet. He stooped. It was a Louis d'Or gold coin. Some charitable soul, a woman no doubt, had passed there, and at the pathetic sight of that little shoe in the snow had remembered a poetic Christmas legend, and with discreet fingers had dropped a splendid gift so that the forsaken little one might still believe in the presence of the child Christ, and might awake with renewed faith in the midst of her misery. A gold Louis coin! That meant many days of rest and comfort for the little beggar. Lucien was just about to awaken the little girl and surprise her with her good fortune when, in a strange hallucination, he heard a voice in his ear which whispered with the drawling inflection of the old Pole, "I haven't stirred from this place for 2 days, and for 2 whole days 17 hasn't come out once. I'll bet you my fist that when the clock strikes 12, 17 will be the winning number." Then this youth, who was 23 years of age, the descendant of honest men, this youth who bore a great military name and had never been guilty of an unmanly act, conceived a monstrous thought. An insane desire took possession of him. He looked anxiously up and down the street, and having assured himself that he had no witness, he knelt, and reaching out cautiously with trembling fingers, stole the treasure from the little shoe, then rose with a spring and ran breathlessly down the street. He rushed like a madman up the stairs of the gambling house, flung open the door with his fist, and burst into the room at the first stroke of midnight. He threw the gold piece on the table and cried, "17!" And 17 won. He then pushed the whole pile on the red. The red won. He left the 72 louis on the same color. The red came out again. He doubled the stakes twice, 3 times, and always with the same success. Before him was a huge pile of gold and banknotes. His luck was something unheard of, something almost supernatural. One might have believed that the little ivory roulette ball, in its frenzied dance around the table, had been bewitched, magnetized by this feverish gambler, and obeyed his will. With a few bold strokes, Lucien had won back the bundle of banknotes which he had lost in the early part of the evening. Then he staked 200 and 300 louis at a time, and as his fantastic luck never failed him, he soon won back the whole capital that had constituted his inherited fortune. In his haste to begin the game, he had not even thought of taking off his fur-lined coat, the great pockets of which were now swollen with rolls of banknotes and heavy with the weight of the gold. Not knowing where to put the money that was steadily accumulating before him, Lucien stuffed it away in the inside and outside pockets of his coat, his vest, his trousers, in his cigar case, and even his handkerchief. Everything became a recipient. And still he played, and still he won, his brain whirling the while like that of a drunkard or a madman. It was amazing to see him stand there, throwing gold on the table by the handful, with that haughty gesture of absolute certainty and disdain. But withal, there was a gnawing at his heart, something that felt like a red-hot iron there, and he could not rid himself of the vision of the child asleep in the snow, the child whom he had robbed. Lucien said to himself, "In just a few minutes, I will go back to her. She must be there in the same place. Of course she must be there. It is no crime after all. I will make it right to her. It will be no crime. Quite the contrary. I will leave here in a few moments when the clock strikes again. I swear it. Just as soon as the clock strikes again, I will stop. I will go straight to where she is. I will take her up in my arms and will carry her home with me asleep. I've done her no harm. I have made a fortune for her. I will keep her with me and educate her. I will love her as I would a child of my own, and I will take care of her, always, as long as she lives." But the clock struck 1, a quarter past, then half past, and Lucien was still there. Finally, a few minutes before 2, the man opposite him rose brusquely and said in a loud voice, "The bank is broken, gentlemen. This will do for tonight." Lucien started, and wedging his way brutally through the group of gamblers who pressed around him in envious admiration, hurried out into the street and ran as fast as he could toward the stone bench. In a moment, he saw by the light of the gas that the child was still there. "God be praised," said Lucien, and his heart gave a great throb of joy. Yes, here she was. He took her little hand in his. Poor little hand, how cold it was. He caught her under the arms and lifted her. Her head fell back, but she did not awake. The happy sleep of childhood, thought Lucien. He pressed her close to his breast to warm her, and with a vague presentiment, he tried to rouse her from this heavy sleep by kissing her eyelids. But he realized then with horror that through the child's half-open lids her eyes were dull, glassy, and fixed. A distracting suspicion flashed through his mind. He put his lips to the child's mouth, but he felt no breath. While Lucien had been building a fortune with the louis stolen from this little one, she, homeless and forsaken, had perished from the cold. Lucien felt a suffocating knot at his throat. In his anguish, he tried to cry out, and in the effort which he made, he awoke from this nightmare, and found himself on the leather lounge in the gambling room, where he had fallen asleep a little before midnight. The garçon of the den had gone home at about 5 o'clock, and out of pity had not wakened him. A misty December dawn made the window panes pale. Lucien went out pawned his watch, took a bath, then went over to the Bureau of Recruits and enlisted as a volunteer in the army. Lucien Dehem is now a lieutenant. He has not a cent in the world but his pay. He manages to make that do, however, for he is a steady officer and never touches a card. He even tries to economize, it would seem. For a few days ago, a comrade, who was following him up one of the steep streets of the Casbah, saw him stop to lay a piece of money in the lap of a little Spanish girl who had fallen asleep in a doorway. His comrade was startled at the poor lieutenant's generosity, for this piece of money was a gold louis. And that concludes Francois Coppee's 1892 Christmas story, The Louis d'Or. This is John Rhapsodies. Thank you for listening. If you like this story and would like to hear more, please subscribe, like, comment, and click the notification bell to help this YouTube channel grow. And remember, hear the words of old.